In the spring of 1819, when London's season was at its brightest and its judgments at their cruelest, Miss Eliza Harrington learned how swiftly affection could be priced, weighed, and discarded. The ballroom at Ashcombe House shimmered with candlelight and confidence, yet she stood at its edge feeling already removed from it, as though some invisible hand had pushed her gently out of favor. She had been invited, after all, but no longer awaited. Every courtesy paid to her that evening carried the faint chill of farewell. Only days before, the Earl of Westmere had spoken of futures as if they were certainties. His attentions had been measured, respectful, and consistent, the kind that signaled intention without ever stooping to passion. Eliza, raised to read the subtleties of rank and propriety, had allowed herself a careful hope. She possessed neither fortune nor titled relations, but her father's name was honorable, her manners exact, and her education sufficient to recommend her. In another age, or under kinder circumstances, she might have been enough. The announcement came not from the Earl himself, but through the soft cruelty of collective knowledge. Conversations hushed as she approached. Glances slid past her shoulder. At last, a lady whose smile had never been friendly whispered what the room already knew. The Earl was engaged, and not to Eliza Harrington. His chosen bride was Miss Augusta Fairley, an heiress with coal lands in the north and a dowry large enough to silence his creditors. The match was prudent, celebrated, and irreversible. When the Earl finally sought her out, it was with the composure of a man who believed himself blameless. He spoke of necessity, of duty to his family name, of obligations inherited alongside his title. His voice was steady, almost kind, which wounded her more deeply than anger might have done. Eliza listened without interruption, her posture calm, her hands folded as though this were merely another social exchange. She did not beg, nor accuse. She thanked him for his honesty and wished him happiness, each word chosen with the care of someone determined to leave no mark of desperation behind. That night marked her quiet undoing. London society did not condemn her openly, it simply withdrew its interest. Invitations thinned. Conversations shortened. What had once been interpreted as modest reserve was now recast as insignificance. Without the prospect of advantageous marriage, her presence became unnecessary, her future an inconvenience best ignored. Eliza understood this language well enough. She had been trained to read rooms long before she learned to read books. Within a month, her circumstances altered decisively. Her father's modest income could not sustain her indefinitely, and her mother's health had long made domestic life uncertain. Through distant connections, Eliza accepted a position as a paid companion to a widowed cousin in Bath. It was a respectable role, yet one that erased her claim to youthful possibility. Companions were present, but not central, useful, but rarely remembered. She packed her gowns with care, setting aside those that spoke too loudly of former expectations. The journey away from London felt like an exile enacted without ceremony. She watched the city retreat through the carriage window, its spires and smoke dissolving into fields, and with them the version of herself that had once imagined a different ending. Bath proved orderly and quiet, governed by routine rather than ambition. Days were spent reading aloud, arranging correspondence, walking prescribed paths. Eliza performed her duties with grace, earning appreciation without intimacy, praise without affection. Time passed with an efficiency that surprised her. 2 years unfolded not as a series of events, but as a steady discipline of restraint. She learned how to make herself unobtrusive without becoming invisible, how to speak only when spoken to, and how to carry disappointment without allowing it to deform her. In rare moments of solitude, she allowed herself memory, though never regret. What had been lost, she told herself, had never truly been promised. Yet even in obscurity, she retained what society could not take, her dignity, her intelligence, and a quiet resilience shaped by necessity. She read history and philosophy in borrowed hours, sharpening her mind where fortune had failed her. If love had been denied her, she would at least refuse bitterness. It was a vow made without witnesses, and therefore unbreakable. The letter that altered her course arrived without warning, sealed in an unfamiliar hand. An invitation to a country house in Hampshire, extended through her cousin's acquaintance, required her presence as a temporary companion to a visiting relation. The tone was formal, unremarkable, yet something in its timing unsettled her. Eliza folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her bed, aware only that she was standing at the edge of a chapter she had not planned, and that the world which had once dismissed her was, at last, about to look her way again. She did not yet know whose house it was, nor the nature of the company she would keep there, and she resisted the foolish urge to imagine that it mattered. Experience had taught her that expectations were luxuries best afforded by the secure. Still, as she prepared for departure, she lingered over small decisions, choosing books, mending gloves, pressing letters, as though these careful acts might somehow influence what awaited her. On the morning she left Bath, the sky hung low and pale, and the carriage wheels sounded unnaturally loud against the stones. Eliza stepped forward without ceremony, carrying with her nothing but composure, and the untested knowledge that survival had already taught her how to endure, and perhaps, one day, to be chosen. She did not mistake movement for hope, nor invitation for promise, but she felt the faint stirring of consequence, the sense that her story, long paused, had begun to turn its page at last. Somewhere ahead lay judgment, choice, and the gaze of a world she had learned to face without flinching. Whether kindly or cruel, she would meet it. Eliza Harrington arrived at Ravenscourt on a grey afternoon softened by mist, the great house rising from its parkland with a gravity that seemed to quiet even the wind. The estate announced itself not through ostentation but through proportion and restraint, its stone worn smooth by generations of authority. She was shown inside without ceremony, her name noted politely, her role understood at once. She belonged to the margins again, yet the house itself felt attentive, as though walls accustomed to power were curious about those who entered without it. The Duke of Ravenscourt did not meet her upon arrival. He was, she was told, engaged with estate business, and she accepted the explanation without thought. Dukes were men of schedule, of distance, of lives governed by obligation rather than inclination. When she first saw him later that evening, it was across a long dining table lit by a disciplined line of candles. He sat at its head, dark-haired, composed, his expression reserved to the point of austerity. His mourning was subtle but unmistakable, marked not by black clothes but by a certain withdrawal of warmth, as though some essential fire had been banked rather than extinguished. Introductions were brief. He acknowledged her with a nod that carried neither interest nor dismissal, merely recognition. Eliza felt no disappointment. She had learned to measure interactions not by promise but by precision, and his courtesy was exact. Still, she noticed the careful way he listened to conversation, the way his gaze lingered not on the loudest speaker but on the one who chose words most sparingly. It was an attention that suggested habit rather than flirtation. Over the following days, she came to understand the rhythms of Ravenscourt. Mornings were quiet, afternoons structured, evenings formal. Guests arrived and departed with the ease of those accustomed to belonging. Eliza moved among them as required, assisting her charge, offering conversation when prompted, retreating when unnecessary. Yet despite her efforts at unobtrusiveness, she became aware of a subtle shift. The Duke began, without seeming to do so, to notice her. It began with a book. One morning, she found a volume of essays placed beside her seat in the morning room, its pages marked with a ribbon. No note accompanied it, but the choice was deliberate, its subject aligned with a comment she had made days earlier, half overheard and nearly forgotten. She read it carefully, understanding the gesture for what it was, an acknowledgment, restrained yet intentional. Conversation followed, never private, always proper, yet gradually more frequent. He asked her opinions as though they mattered, not to challenge but to understand. Eliza answered with honesty moderated by caution, revealing intelligence without presumption. She sensed that he valued clarity, that he was a man who distrusted excess of any kind, including emotion. In his presence, she felt neither judged nor indulged, only regarded. Others noticed as well. At dinner, places were subtly arranged so that she sat within his line of sight. During walks, he fell into step beside her without remark. These were small acts, easily dismissed, yet in a house governed by hierarchy, they carried weight. Whispers began, first among the younger guests, then among those whose lives depended upon reading advantage early. Eliza heard none of it directly, but she felt the atmosphere shift, the air tightening with speculation. The Duke's family was less subtle. Letters arrived, visitors lingered, conversations turned pointed. Eligible women appeared with studied frequency, their charms displayed with increasing confidence. Eliza observed this with detachment sharpened by memory. She had once been the subject of similar calculations and knew their language well. Whatever interest the Duke showed her, she understood it could not withstand the combined pressure of title, inheritance, and expectation. Yet the attentions did not cease. One evening, during a gathering made noisy by polite enthusiasm, the Duke spoke to her quietly of the estate's history, of decisions made by men long dead, of lives constrained by duty. His tone was reflective, almost confessional, though his words revealed nothing of himself directly. Eliza listened, aware that he was offering her not intimacy, but trust, and that such an offering from a man of his position was not made lightly. The incident that hardened speculation occurred on a rainy afternoon when a carriage failed to arrive as planned. Circumstances forced Eliza and the Duke to share a drive to a neighboring village, the arrangement explained away as necessity. The journey was brief, silent, and entirely proper, yet the sight of them together, alone, unsettled the household. By evening, the story had altered, acquiring details that did not exist, intentions that had never been spoken. Eliza sensed the danger immediately. She withdrew where she could, limiting conversation, shortening walks, guarding her reputation with renewed vigilance. The Duke noticed the change and, for the first time, addressed it directly. He asked, without accusation, why she had become distant. She answered truthfully, speaking of appearances, of her position, of the cost of misinterpretation. He listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When he replied, it was not with reassurance but with respect. He acknowledged the risk she bore, the imbalance between them, the injustice of consequence. He did not ask her to be patient, nor promise protection. Instead, he thanked her for her candor. It was the most honorable response she could have imagined, and the most dangerous. By the end of the week, it was widely believed that the Duke would soon make an announcement, though no one agreed on its nature. Eliza prepared herself for departure, certain that resolution, whatever form it took, would not include her. On her final evening, she found another book waiting for her, its margins marked with careful notes. She closed it gently, aware that some gifts were not meant to be returned, and that whatever the Duke intended, his regard had already altered the course of her carefully contained life, leaving her suspended between caution and a hope she had sworn never to entertain again. Eliza did not announce her intention to leave Ravenscourt, yet the house seemed to sense it all the same. Her movements grew economical, her presence more restrained, as though she were already rehearsing absence. She rose earlier than required, completed her duties with quiet efficiency, and spent her remaining hours in rooms that overlooked the gardens rather than the social heart of the house. Departure, she had learned, was best approached gradually, like cold water entered one careful step at a time. The Duke noticed, as he noticed most things that mattered to him, though he spoke of it to no one. He had been raised to master consequence, to anticipate reaction, to weigh every choice against generations of expectation. Yet her withdrawal unsettled him more than the loud ambitions of those who openly sought his favor. Eliza's restraint was not strategy but self-protection, and that distinction troubled him. Pressure closed in with relentless courtesy. His mother's relations wrote with increasing frequency. Old allies reminded him of obligations framed as opportunities. Even Ravenscourt itself seemed to conspire, its long portraits gazing down with mute insistence, its silence heavy with precedent. He understood precisely what was required of him, and had understood it long before Eliza Harrington entered his house. What unsettled him was the realization that understanding no longer guaranteed obedience. The evening he chose to speak to her was unremarkable by design. A light rain pressed against the windows, muting the estate into reflection. Guests occupied themselves elsewhere, and the fire burned low in the smaller drawing-room. Eliza had come to return a book, nothing more, yet she sensed the weight of intention the moment he asked her to remain. His tone was calm, but not casual, and she recognized the difference at once. He did not begin with apology or explanation. He asked instead whether she intended to leave. Eliza answered honestly, though her voice remained steady. She spoke of propriety, of her role, of the stories already taking shape beyond her control. She said she would not remain where her presence might be misinterpreted or become a source of inconvenience. Dignity, she had learned, was not preserved by waiting to be dismissed. The Duke listened without interruption, his hands folded, his posture composed. When she finished, he acknowledged her reasoning as sound. He did not contradict her assessment, nor did he attempt to persuade her otherwise. Instead, he told her that he wished she would understand something before she went. It was not a request framed as authority, but as appeal, and that alone altered the air between them. He spoke then of his wife, not with sentiment but with precision. Their marriage, he explained, had been honorable and respectful, forged as much by duty as by choice. Her death had left him not shattered, but hollowed, aware of how easily a life could be shaped by expectation until little room remained for inclination. In the years since, he had resolved not to repeat a union entered without conviction, regardless of advantage. This resolve, he admitted, had placed him at odds with nearly everyone whose counsel he was expected to value. Eliza listened, conscious that he was offering her something rare, context without demand. When he finished, she spoke of her own history, though she had not intended to. She described the Earl's decision without bitterness, framing it as an education rather than a betrayal. She spoke of obscurity, of the lessons learned when one's value is reduced to silence, and of her determination never again to accept a place offered only in the absence of better options. The confession was quiet, almost restrained to the point of restraint itself, yet it altered the space between them more decisively than any declaration could have done. They stood no closer, yet something essential had shifted. The Duke regarded her with an intensity she had not seen before, not possessive, not indulgent, but deliberate, as though he were finally allowing himself to see her entire. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, though no less controlled. He told her that he admired her judgment, her resolve, and the manner in which she guarded herself without hardening. He said that her presence at Ravenscourt had not been an accident of convenience, but a circumstance he had come to value beyond calculation. He did not speak the word love, nor did she expect him to. Instead, he said that he found the prospect of her absence deeply unsettling, and that he wished, if she would permit it, to continue her acquaintance on terms that acknowledged both her worth and her risk. Eliza felt the familiar instinct to retreat rise sharply within her, sharpened by memory and caution. She reminded him, gently, of the consequences he faced, of the expectations arrayed against such an intention. She told him she would not be the reason he fractured his obligations or invited scandal that could not be undone. Her tone was firm, but not cold, shaped by the knowledge that refusal, if it came, must be complete. The Duke accepted this without protest. He told her he did not ask for assurances, nor did he offer them. He asked only for time, not as delay but as consideration, to resolve a decision that could not be made hastily or privately. He said that whatever choice he reached, it would be his alone, and that he would not permit her name to be used as speculation or shield. This promise, understated yet absolute, carried more weight than any vow. When the conversation ended, it did so naturally, without ceremony or lingering gesture. Eliza left the room with the book still in her hands, its margins dense with his careful handwriting. She returned to her chamber aware that nothing had been decided, yet everything had changed. The danger had not diminished. It had merely acquired shape. As she prepared for sleep, she understood that she now stood not on the edge of dismissal, but at the threshold of choice, and that whatever followed would require a courage she had long believed unnecessary to hope for again. The days that followed passed beneath a strain of careful civility, as though Ravenscourt itself were holding its breath. Eliza remained, neither guest nor fixture, suspended by courtesy and uncertainty. The Duke conducted himself with unchanged propriety, yet his attention, when it came, was unmistakably deliberate. He no longer sought her conversation in passing moments, nor did he offer tokens that might invite interpretation. Instead, he allowed silence to work where gesture once had, trusting restraint to convey what could not yet be spoken. The household sensed the tension and responded with heightened ceremony. Dinners grew more formal, conversations more guarded. Those who had arrived with expectations lingered, waiting for clarity that refused to arrive. Eliza observed all of this with the practiced calm of someone who understood that anticipation itself could be a weapon. She neither advanced nor retreated, determined to let events unfold without sacrificing the composure she had so carefully rebuilt. The Duke's decision, when it came, was neither impulsive nor concealed. On the final evening of the week, a gathering was arranged in the long gallery, its purpose presented as ordinary, its audience unmistakably chosen. Family members, influential allies, and guests of consequence were present, their attention sharpened by rumor and readiness. Eliza attended as required, positioned discreetly near the far end of the room, resolved to witness whatever conclusion was to be reached without imagining herself its object. When the Duke entered, conversation subsided with instinctive obedience. He stood before them with the ease of authority long practiced, his expression composed, his posture unyielding. He spoke of Ravenscourt, of its history and responsibilities, of the privilege and burden of stewardship. His words were measured, familiar, yet beneath them ran a current of finality that commanded attention. Those who listened sensed that they were being prepared, not persuaded. Then he spoke of choice. He acknowledged the expectations placed upon him, the alliances proposed, the advantages offered in good faith. He did not dismiss them, nor did he belittle the motives behind them. Instead, he stated plainly that a life governed solely by advantage was one he would no longer accept. The room shifted perceptibly, the weight of precedent pressing forward only to be held at bay by his resolve. At last, he named Eliza Harrington, not as subject of rumor, nor as object of charity, but as a woman whose character, judgment, and integrity he esteemed above convenience or fortune. He said that he had come to value her not in spite of her circumstances, but because of the dignity with which she bore them. He declared his intention to offer her his name, his home, and his loyalty, fully aware of the disruption such a choice would cause, and fully prepared to bear it. Silence followed, dense and complete. Eliza felt the room turn toward her, the collective gaze sharp with curiosity, disbelief, and judgment. She remained still, her hands folded, her expression composed, though her heart pressed painfully against the restraint she had cultivated for years. She had not been consulted, she realized, because she was not being bargained for. She was being claimed openly, without mitigation. The Duke crossed the distance between them with deliberate calm and addressed her directly, his voice neither raised nor softened. He asked whether she would accept what he offered, not as refuge or compensation, but as partnership freely chosen. He did not promise ease, nor did he deny consequence. He offered only constancy, respect, and the certainty that she would never again be made to feel dispensable. Eliza met his gaze and, in doing so, felt the full measure of what was being placed before her. She thought of the Earl, and the careful way affection had once been withdrawn. She thought of obscurity, of survival, of the vow she had made never to be chosen second. When she answered, her voice carried across the room with unforced clarity. She said that she would accept, not because she was elevated by his rank, but because she recognized in his choice a courage equal to her own restraint. She said she would stand beside him willingly, with neither apology nor fear. Reaction followed swiftly, though not uniformly. Some faces hardened, others softened, a few revealed admiration reluctantly earned. The Duke's family absorbed the announcement with visible effort, yet even among the disapproving there was recognition that his resolve was immovable. The Earl of Westmere, present by coincidence rather than design, looked on with an expression Eliza did not attempt to interpret. What had passed between them belonged to another life, and she no longer measured herself by it. Formalities proceeded as required, though their meaning had altered. Conversations resumed with careful politeness, speculation already reshaping itself around the new reality. Eliza remained at the Duke's side, neither triumphal nor diminished, aware that the path ahead would not be without challenge. Yet for the first time, she felt no need to guard herself against hope. It stood before her, declared and undeniable. Later, when the house had settled and the corridors quieted, the Duke spoke to her privately once more. He thanked her, not for acceptance, but for the honesty that had made his choice possible. Eliza replied that whatever awaited them, it would be faced without concealment. As they parted for the night, she understood that resolution had not ended the story, but transformed it, and that the life she had once endured was giving way, at last, to one she had freely chosen to enter.